welcome to Bloomberg Quint. You're watching The Fine Print, and we're coming to you today from the campus of Jindal University in New Delhi. The Howard Law School and Law School Admission Council are in town to talk about the future of legal education in India. But before I introduce you to my distinguished guests, let me bring into the conversation the biggest stakeholder when we talk about legal education in India, the law students. And we have some of them turning out in good numbers to tell us how they feel about legal education in India and whether or not it prepares them for a career in law. Guys, I'm going to do a quick show of hands on how you feel about legal education in India. How many of you think that the cost of legal education in India is excessive compared to what the market ends up paying for that skill? Quick show of hands. Is it excessive? Is it not? Quick show of hands. Do you feel it's excessive or it's not? Yes or no question? You can go up. It's fine. I mean, okay, all right. Do you think that the subjects that you end up studying in college are contemporary enough? Again, show of hands. Do you think they're contemporary enough? Yes, okay, three. Okay, three of out of 20 feel that they are contemporary enough. So the rest of you think that the curriculum needs to keep up with what's happening in the outside world? Okay, final question then. How many of you do you think that there is a gap between what you're taught in law school and what the employers expect of you when you go out there in the real world? There's a gap? There's no gap? Okay. There's lots of them telling you that. Okay, then let me bring in my guests today. A quick introduction, and that sets the tone of our conversation today on the 3 C's when we're talking about future of legal education in India: career, curriculum, and cost. And to talk about the 3 C's, I have with me David Wilkins from Howard Law School, Kelly Testy from Law School Admission Council, Sandeep Berry from Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas to give us the employer perspective, Shamnath Bashir of IDAI, who's doing some fabulous work in making law school and legal education affordable for the marginalized in the society. And finally, Raj Kumar at the center of it all from Jindal University. Welcome to the show, Kelly and gentlemen. David, I'd like to start with you. You've been studying the landscape of legal education, not just in India, but in Brazil, in China, in Chile. When we talk about the cost, how do we compare with some of the other jurisdictions? And do you think, as an outcome, we're costlier education market compared to some of the jurisdictions that you've been looking at?
So cost is always a problem in any education, particularly legal education. I'd say probably on the spectrum, to be very honest, India is lower cost than other jurisdictions, in part because India is a mostly undergraduate law degree. It's oftentimes public law schools. In my country, for example, just to give you some comparison, the average cost of 1 year of law school is well over $50,000 US dollars, and my law school is probably over $60,000 US dollars. So if you put it in that comparison, India is probably less expensive, certainly, than some jurisdictions. But I think the real issue is about value. It's about what is the value the students are receiving and whether they think that the education they're getting is preparing them for the jobs of the 21st century. And I think that is an important question, and one I hope we'll have a chance to talk about.
Sure. Shamnath, let me bring you in. You've been a student of a national law school here in India. You've been doing some fabulous work to make legal education affordable, not just at the entrance level, but through the course of that education of that or that college. What has your experience been through IDIA? Is cost a deterrent for some of the students that you have been speaking with over the last several years? And if you overcome that cost, is law a lucrative career for them?
Yeah, I think cost is certainly a big issue if we want to make legal education inclusive. And we come at it, at least from IDEA's perspective, from the point of view that law is about justice and the certain constitutional values that we need to adhere to, which is equality, inclusion, and particularly the law schools need to be much more conscious of that, because they're the front runners of the justice paradigm that we need to drive forward. The most reputed national law schools within this country, all of them charge fees at a fairly high level. And I think the right question to ask is, as David said, is are they delivering the right value? And I think we can have a separate debate just on that. I mean, because a lot of the law schools within the national law school frame, and a lot of the younger ones, are charging the same ones as the older, more reputed ones, but without the infrastructure, without the faculty, without delivering the kind of quality legal education that they're delivering, and without any, to me, the ideal law school is one that will charge per value, but will also have enough opportunities for low-income students to come in through scholarships and the others, so that you retain a diverse population of students. You see, if the students are all from one income bracket, they're all going to be thinking the same way. You're going to get a homogeneous set of students and a kind of a groupthink. So for legal education itself, and for bringing more richness to legal education, I think it's important to get a variety of perspectives, particularly in a country like India, which is so diverse by itself. And you need to see that diversity reflected in the classroom, particularly in law, because law is about society, law is about social change, law is about all these things. And if you're just going to get one set of people coming into the top law schools and going into the top brackets of the legal profession, you've got a serious problem.
Sure. Can you help me with your perspective here, because you interact with students right at the beginning, where they are thinking of a career in law. You're associated within US with what? To conduct LSATs with about over 200 colleges?
Yes.
Tell me this, that you have 200 colleges. In terms of quality, when you look at the cost and the value that they are giving versus what, over 1,000 that we have here in India, and like Shamnath pointed out, some of the ones on the rear end are still costing the same as the ones on the top. Where does that gap lie, and how can India look to fill that gap?
Sure. Well, cost is a really important issue, as you note, and I think, as the panelists have said, value an even more important question. So we agree at the Law School Admission Council that we need to have a really diverse group of students coming into law, because justice really needs your perspectives, and we're really so happy that you care about law and that you've come to study it. But our job then is to deliver value for your investment. And we see in the United States that overall law students, as they graduate, really do feel that that investment is worth it. Even though students go into a wide variety of careers across that career spectrum, that investment is seen as being very fulfilling. But what that means is that we need to do the best we can in law school to give you the kind of knowledge, skills, and values that is going to educate you not just for day one out in the profession, but for a lifetime in law at the service of justice. And that's really, I think, the task in front of us, is to make sure we understand the duty to really give that value through the curriculum that we deliver. And also then to link with the profession, and I think we'll have a conversation about that, because your development as a lawyer isn't just in law school. It goes throughout the profession, and that's something that I think we also need to talk more about.
Sure. Okay. Let me bring the conversation to you guys, and please feel free to chip in with a question or two. For how many of you, when you were considering, let's say, a law career versus, let's say, engineering or medical, cost was one of the factors compared to what you end up getting when you're out there in the market looking for a job? Please.
So where I live, there's a lot of engineers, because there's a lot of colleges as well which people go to. So my city especially has, like you mentioned engineers in your example, and those engineers at this point aren't even getting paid minimum wage, because there will be another engineer who will take less than that. So a daily wage laborer where I live makes about, at minimum wage, he makes about 300 rupees a day, and an engineer makes about between 150 to 200.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah.
And
so
how does that compare with the career in law?
The lawyers where I live, even if they're handling very, very small things like stamping your contracts or just going through your papers, they still make good amounts of money. The lawyers, even in, I live in a village currently near a major city, and even a lawyer there makes well over 60,000 a month.
Okay, so you think that the legal education that you've signed up for is worth your buck? Gives you a bang for your buck?
I don't know whether it's given me a bang for my buck yet because I'm still in my.
No, I'm
first-
sure you're talking to some of your seniors, right? Yes.
So I am in probably one of the most expensive law schools in the country.
Okay.
So I was very hesitant about taking that choice because it is a big investment on my part and my parents. So I talked to somebody who passed out of the university, and she said that the money you put in is worth it because you get opportunities here like you don't get in other places. You get the kind of exposure and you get the kind of learning that you tend not to have otherwise.
Okay, all right. Raj, come in here. That, with, like the gentleman very candidly said that, look, he had to think about the costs given the brand that he's signing up for. But that's not necessarily true for a number of other colleges that, exist in India. For those students who needs to put their foot down and say, look, you can't demand the kind of fees that you're charging because it's not paying off when these guys are going in the market. And I hear these things regularly when I talk to, freshers in litigation who say that at some places they are having to pay, senior counsels to intern with them. Senior counsels who are earning, lakhs for an appearance. So how do you bridge this gap?
Well, first of all, I think we need to make an important distinction between the investment that you make for education and sort of de-link it from the jobs that you get immediately after that.
But
In
it's
fact,
a means to an
well,
end. I mean,
I'll-
education is important. We
I
can
know,
talk academics.
but this is a very sort of a business school type model where placements and the return on investment in education is measured in purely monetary terms after the immediate job. But frankly speaking, it's a 55 to 60 year investment you're making. You are not really investing for the next job that you're making. The fundamentals of university education is what is going to determine your future life and career. So once you start the ROI, not in the framework of the immediate job you're going to get, but the 50-year horizon of the kind of jobs and careers and sort of a trajectory, you will immediately have a different answer, first. Okay. Secondly, as far as cost is concerned, let's become a little more analytical and scientific about it. Cost of education is also about what does it take for an institution to be run. And unfortunately in India, the public-private divide in India has unfortunately not made us realize how do you determine a cost of a degree program. Frankly speaking, the most important part of determining the cost of a degree program is what does it take to build a university, what does it take to run a university, what does it take to run a world-class institution, from infrastructure cost to faculty cost to all of that. And then you start talking about, okay, if this is what the cost of building and running a good institution, what ought to be the fee structure so that the people who are going to be educated will have to pay for it, or alternatively, state or other sources subsidize it. And then you come to the stage where if this is what the cost is going to be, how do you ensure that we have a diversified class, because there will be people who simply may not be able to afford that education. I mean, frankly, we don't have that conversation. I studied at both Oxford and Harvard University, in Harvard Law School. I didn't spend 1 rupee in both these institutions. Oxford, I got the Rhodes Scholarship, and Harvard Law School gave me 3 different fellowships, and I didn't spend 1 rupee to go to these places. Does it mean that Harvard and Oxford did not get the money? They of course got the money. Both those institutions got the money, but I didn't pay for it. So the model that's very important for us to understand is, for good quality education, there is expenditure involved. We can discuss who pays for it. In India, the historically evolved model is public institutions were state funded, there were subsidies, there were governmental funding, and that resulted in a cost of education which is simply unsustainable. The historically evolved private institutions began to charge, and some of them are dubious, and that's where they didn't offer the kind of education which the cost was supposed to be given. Our model, which is a hybrid model where we do have, we have a fee that I believe is essential for what we are offering, but over 60% of our students are on scholarship. We brought the vision and imagination and philanthropy that was critical for ensuring that accessibility is available for students who can't afford.
Okay. I'm not even going to do the costing for building an institution. Shavnath, let me bring you here, and we've discussed this off record. the 3-member committee who recently submitted its report on the entrance level exam costs, which is the CLAT, that committee concluded that there is 90% profiteering, and we're talking about a national law school. We're not talking about, let's say, a private university, getting this job to conduct the law school admission test. Who's to be held accountable for it, and who's going to tell these national universities that you can't profiteer at an entrance level exam?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question, Payaswini, and I fully endorse what Raj said, which is that we have just not been scientific about costs, right? I mean, legal education in India was such that, I remember when I entered the National Law School in Bangalore, we were the first batch when the fee hike happened, right? So before me, the fees for our previous batch used to be about 5,000 to 7,500 rupees a year. When I came in, they hiked it to 25, and my father told me no way, because he'd lost a bunch of money. He was an agriculturalist then primarily, and luckily for us, they had a sliding scale, and they said, well, if you can't afford 25, we'll put you down to the earlier bracket, but show us the income certificate and other things. And so we were able to get an education. The next year after me, they scrapped it. It was 25,000 uniformly for all. Now, if you look at it, it's about 2 to 2.5 lakhs. Still, the National Law School in Bangalore is still considered one of the lower amongst the NLUs. But there's no systematic analysis of what do these costs go towards. And I suspect that came to the fore with CLAT, which is just an application form for writing the law entrance. And the committee very clearly said that this is a 90% profit margin. In fact, if you charge the 1,500 for the CLAT application as opposed to 4,000, you will still make a decent profit. The law schools now argue that, well, we don't have money from any other source. And again, going back to what Raj said, well, the government, these are national law schools. You are supposed to work with the government. These are supposedly public universities. Right. The government has to foot some of that bill. We can talk to people in the industry, the ones that are hiring. And I guess we can have that conversation when Sandeep comes in, which is that how do all other players in the ecosystem contribute to this, and how do we deliver real value? Because I'm completely with them on the fact that if there is real value, charge. But make sure that somebody pays for it, so that the law school, the faculty has to be paid. And I think Raj has delivered a very successful model of very high quality faculty, but paying them twice or thrice as much as what the national law schools pay. The national law schools pay now because the pay commission mandates them to pay. Otherwise, they wouldn't have paid this sum. Yeah. The model was always hiring on contract.
Okay, all right. So we've got a good sort of sense of that the costs need to be looked at, and it's a conversation we need to have. The government needs to do its part, and I'm not sure. Sandeep is very quiet when Shamnath said that maybe law schools could do their part. But let me move to now the second C I want to talk about, which is curriculum. And it's a very example that is a little personal to me. When I finished law school a couple of years ago, I was writing this exam, which was the Presidency Towns Insolvency Act, and I was like, why am I studying this colonial era act when there is Sarfezi, when there is SICA, when there is DRT, where there's CDR going on? And at that time, even the Companies Act was being looked at by the government, etc. But we were still looking at the old act. Sandeep, I know that the basics are important, where it all started is important, but do you feel that there is a disconnect between what students are being taught in law universities versus when they come to you as freshers and you're like, oh, I thought that you would be taught this in law school?
So actually, first I want to clarify the previous issue.
Please say
I'm fully supportive of the point that Raj and Shamnath have made, and I think employers such as law firms, as well as I would say some senior advocates, etc., can easily contribute to this issue. So, which will take care of what Raj said, that law schools have some expenses. Somebody has to pay for it. Let's just talk about who pays for it, right? And so I'll be very happy to support in my individual capacity, plus hopefully try and persuade at a law firm level in that direction. I think that's a very good idea. Coming to your immediate question, one thing that I wanted to say was that although law schools have the primary obligation for legal education, there is a part of the responsibility that also lies with, say, law firms and other institutions. And so in that light, in terms of the gaps that you mentioned, I think what I find is that generally there's very good grounding on concepts, on philosophy behind law, some of the rationales and things like that. I think where more work can be done is in A, some practical skills, and B, what I would call soft skills. So in practical skills, I would say that, if in a semester you're spending 75 to 80% of the time talking about, let's say in a wills and estates class, you're talking about the philosophy, whether there should be inheritance, whether it should be estate tax, etc. Please spend at least 10% of time teaching students how to write a will. Okay, so that if they're going to practice that law, they have some practical skill. And just you can use the same analogy for other areas, whether corporate law, tax, and so on. On the soft skills, what we often find lacking is things like communication skills. So for example, if we bring in a first year associate on a call with a client, we find that a lot of work needs to be done in terms of teaching them how to respond, where to pause, where to ask a question, where not to interrupt the client, and things like that. And writing, of course, that's a practical skill that needs to be taken care of. I think law schools do a lot of writing classes. I'm just not sure whether they are, to your earlier point about contemporariness, whether they are attuned to contemporary writing. So I think if in a law school you're still teaching only how to write a petition, and you're not teaching how to write a memo on, say, the impact of Supreme Court's Aadhaar judgment on banks and telecom companies, I'm not sure you are equipping students for today's work.
Okay, please come in here, David. That how do you make your curriculum more contemporary? You can't be working into silos that laws are changing in the world out there, but you continue to stick to your old acts which have been repealed, have been changed, have been amended to the extent that in the shape and form that they are being taught, they're no more relevant out there in the commercial world. So how do you bridge this gap, and how have some of the jurisdictions that you've studied been able to bridge that gap?
So I think the very first and most important thing to say is that law schools need to study the profession and need to study what's happening in the profession. The project that has brought me here to India, and which has been a great joy for me to be able to know these wonderful people on the panel and to meet many, many law students. I've been coming now for well over a decade. We just published a book called The Indian Legal Profession and the Age of Globalization, Cambridge University Press book. We'd love for all of you to go and take a look at it. But here's why I think it's important. It's an example of a legal academic institution studying the legal profession. So we have chapters, empirical studies on the changes in law firms like Sandeep's, or in-house legal departments, or how legal education is changing, or the regulation of the legal profession, or public interest in pro bono practice here in India. The law schools can't teach students how to be lawyers in a profession if they don't study that profession. And this is something that's just beginning here in India. I think Raja's school is trying to be a pioneer in this. There are other programs as well. What Shamnad has done over the years has been remarkable, but that needs to be a primary focus. That's the first thing. The second thing I think we have to remember is law school is, and this goes I think to what Raj was saying, law school is not just a trade school, meaning it's not just teaching people how to do a particular job. And the reason it can't be just that is because the job of a lawyer is changing constantly, and it's going to change even more rapidly in the lives of these students through things that Shamnad studies, like artificial intelligence or machine learning or globalization, or the blurring of the boundary between law and business and policy and human resources, psychology. That means what law schools have to do primarily is to teach a set of critical thinking skills that allows students to be able to continue to be lifelong learners as they move throughout their legal careers. So if you put those two things together, if you teach students how is the profession of law changing, how are things that lawyers are being asked to do being now influenced by technology, by globalization, by the intersection of law and business and humanities and economics, with a set of critical thinking skills about how to understand change and how to navigate change And then those soft skills that Sandeep said about how to present yourself, how to work in a team, how to be a leader, how to give advice, all these things that lawyers have to do, those are the things that law schools can do a much better job of. And that's very different than teaching them the latest iteration of the corporate law or the tax law, because those things are going to change. It's the ability to work in a changing environment that we need to teach students.
Okay, Kelly, give me your perspective here. At what point does a university decide that what's happening out there in terms of a new law or a new amendment needs to come into the curriculum? And is it not a fair ask to then, continually assess what you're teaching to your students, whether it's your first year or your fifth year, that things need to change now? At what point do universities take this call?
It's a great question, and I think absolutely all those things can be done. It's really not an either or. You can, in a legal education, through the course of it, both help students understand the theory and the doctrine and the current events and the skills and the values and all of that within a curriculum. And so I think it's really important for us to see that we don't need to pick just one of those, that when we give that value to students that we should, it's really about putting that all together so that it's really the best that we can do in the time that we have with the students. And I think too that one of the things that's so vital for us to keep in mind through this, and it's one of the reasons why we're so proud of the LSAT, is that it's an aptitude test that focuses exactly on those skills of critical thinking and reasoning, that as law changes, that's what's going to serve you well, to be able to adapt and to serve your clients. But law does not just serve clients either. Law serves society. It serves justice. And so in order to really do the best we can for the world we serve, we need to understand that the legal health of society is as important as the environmental health or physical health of people, and that being a lawyer is working for the common good. And so a legal education must be both relevant for now, but also something that can help society evolve and meet the complex challenges of the future.
Okay, all right, I'm going to come to you guys. Did you at any point, I'm not sure what years you're in, think that, oh, why am I being taught this subject and not that subject? Or have you read something outside that you think, oh, why can't we bring that into our classroom? Have any of you thought about what you're studying in terms of subjects and what you're reading, let's say, out of newspapers, or you're talking to your colleagues in other universities, and you think, hey, it'll be good for our professors to pick up this subject or this topic as well? Yes, please.
So I think,
It's on.
yeah, I think if I'm very specific, I study at General Global Law School, and I spent 3 weeks at a national law university. And obviously, as part of pursuing law as a career, it's very important to know how to present yourself in court, to know the basics of mooting and trial advocacy. But in our university, it's a course which has been introduced in the 3rd year. And in other law schools, the freshers seem to be already into it. They seem to be getting an edge, seemingly getting an edge over all of us. So I believe that studying fundamental subjects like sociology, legal methods, jurisprudence is really important. But at the same time, I feel like I know private and government are completely separate. But at the end of the day, when we look into the job market for opportunities, we can't ignore the fact that, hey, they're going to be our competition out there. So I feel that, if you look at litigation specifically, introducing mooting and trial advocacy should have been introduced from earlier, and I feel like we're at a disadvantage in terms of that. So,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I think feedback well taken, Raj. Okay, any other thoughts? Yes.
Well, I just have to quickly respond to that.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Because this is a very important debate within academia, particularly in a 5-year program when students are coming from high school with absolutely no experience of life and work and all of that. We have a very strong philosophical underpinnings about legal education, in which the foundations of legal education ought to be based upon humanities and social sciences. philosophy, political science, history, anthropology, sociology, and these subjects should be taught and economics ought to be the foundation of learning those for the high school leavers in the first couple of years when they ultimately transition to legal education. In some ways, we need to recognize, and that's why today, when we have artificial intelligence and robotics, the work of many lawyers, particularly at the very rudimentary level that you talked about, in which provisions of law and provisions of act and things like that are no longer going to be done by lawyers. It's really about critical thinking, interdisciplinary learning, judgment and creativity, experiential learning, and an opportunity to look at global scenarios. These are things which the chances of AI and robotics and machine learning are going to be less engaged, and that's where the new generation lawyers are going to be trained. It's something like what Steve Jobs said very famously, that the most important thing that he learned in the college was calligraphy. It was not coding, because the calligraphy that he learned helped in preparing the design for Apple. If he had not studied calligraphy, Apple wouldn't, the fonts that Apple had, which revolutionized the entire computing industry, wouldn't have happened. So in some ways, I am very conscious that the functional and instrumental dimension of education need to be balanced with the more substantive foundational learning, particularly when we are talking about undergraduate education.
Okay, all right. There are some more comments and questions here, please.
Ma'am, I'm in a law school, and ma'am, I don't find psychology as a subject in our curriculum. And I think, ma'am, as a law student, I have to be more receptive to who I'm counseling and to my client's feelings. So I have to be empathic and have been judgmental about what he's thinking and how should I react. So ma'am, for like sir said, being having powers like soft powers in communication skills, ma'am, psychology can have been a major subject that could transform new lawyers, but ma'am, I don't find it in our schools and curriculums. So it could be a changing point.
Okay, again, good feedback. There's a question at the back there as well.
Perhaps this is an vague and generic question, so I'll just go on. Law is an evolving concept, and anything which is evolving is incomplete in itself. So how do judges actually come to conclusions and opinions to decide a case which comes under the purview of law? How does this mechanism work, and how does this dynamism of law create an impact on the economy in this era of globalization?
Okay, that's a really long-winded question. Who do you want to ask it to? And essentially, you're looking at how judges are looking at interpreting situations and the impact of that on the economy. Is that what your question is? Somewhat. Okay, you can rephrase it if you'd like. Okay. Yes, please, go on, Kelly.
I'll tackle it. It's a great question, because that question of how do you teach judgment, how do you develop that as a professional skill, I think is really something that is the fascination of legal education. Because if you talk with judges, if you've been in complex practices, what you find is every day you're surprised by the newness of the question that you're trying to answer. And so you're drawing upon your humanities, you're drawing upon your legal knowledge, you're drawing upon your soft skills of empathy for people and a solidarity with humanity and understanding of how society might move and develop. And all that together is trying to give you a sense of the situation and a judgment for what's right now, and will that stand the test of time as law moves forward. So I think your question's a good one, because it goes to the very complexity of the project of legal education. And it's why there aren't easy answers to many of the great things we're discussing today, but it's also why this conversation about the future of legal education in India, the world's largest democracy with so much promise, is so very, very important for us.
All right, there's a question again.
I have a few points to make during the panel.
Do you want a microphone here? Yes.
No, right there, yeah.
Okay.
It's on, you can speak to it.
Okay, first, I'd like to kick on from where first question that you asked about us finding the atmosphere in the classroom where we feel that some things need to be added or subtracted. hardly know about these things that have developed in the recent years. So I come to the classroom and I find that a professor who's done his PhD in, say, biotech law is teaching international banking law to me. Although the professor is great, I must say, no qualms and no complaints about his teaching whatsoever. And there are many parts of the law school that I find this. Now that set me thinking, and I finally come to the conclusion that we cannot afford that kind of specialization yet over here. It'll be too expensive for us. For example, there may be banking and financial law in Queen Mary, London University. No, that professor has been teaching banking and financial law for years, right? We cannot have that as of now. That's my understanding. So I make peace with that and compromise and do whatever I can on my own. I'm an LLM student, taxation, by the way. I study here in this campus, and I go to the main campus for some electives. So that's the first point. Secondly, I'd like to take on from where Professor Raj left about the cost involved. Well, my university does show empathy, does want to show its inclusiveness, and this is my own first-hand experience. I was going in a Uber once to my university, and the taxi driver asked me what I was doing here. I told him, then he said that my son qualified for this place, is a very bright student in grade 12, he got about 95%, and the college calculated everything. Like if you're a resident of Haryana, you get a Haryana domicile concession and a scholarship because he was bright. Altogether, he was asked to pay 2 lakh rupees instead of 6. He was a farmer from a nearby village near the college. So apparently he couldn't afford it. His son went to a very good college in the university, main Delhi University campus. I felt sad that that boy couldn't come to our college, but our college does show this empathy and this social responsibility. It's not that we don't want a diverse group of students here. It's, at the same time, having said that, I'd like to add that there has to be some sense of rational discrimination. You cannot have each and every one in the society. You have to do some sieving. And after that, those who qualify. That's life. Right. Coming to what...
Can I respond to the banking and finance?
Yes, please, please go ahead.
So I think that's a great question, or this great point that you made, and I think that's an excellent example of where private practitioners can come in and fill the gap that you talked about, right? So I picked up on banking and finance because I spent several years working in-house in that industry, and also in my law practice experience, I've done a lot of that. So if that's one of the places where the university is looking to fill in that gap, I'm ready to volunteer.
This is the challenge that we have in India, that the interaction between the practitioners and academia is unfortunately very limited. And there are structural problems in public institutions for involvement, and I must say that by and large, be it the lawyers, the judges, both the corporate and litigating bar, they see largely universities and law schools as an occasional sort of visit and give one lecture or a seminar, or that at its best or at worst, they see them as recruitment platforms. They don't see them as knowledge partners in an effort to build institutional capacity. And so we really need to address the problem of how do law firms, corporations, companies, business enterprises, think tanks, research institutions, non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations, judiciary engage with law schools with a view to partner with them and to build that intellectual capacity, which frankly, academics alone can't do that. And so you can't lament about the fact that why you don't have that type of experiences in our law schools, because there has been indifference on the part of industry, law firms and corporations, including the in-house counsels, to engage with law schools in a more substantive manner.
Okay, you've had some problem, Shamnath, with getting, because you interact both with the commercial world. You're somewhere in the center where you do a lot of work for students and with students, but you also, interact with the commercial world. Have you been able to convince the commercial world to come to campuses and talk to students?
Yeah, you see, but when I was teaching at NUJS, which is the National Law School in Calcutta, we had someone from industry come up and say that, well, you know, it takes us, and they put some figures together, and it said it takes us about a year to get someone up to speed once they come out of law school.
Yeah.
So they've done their computation, and they said, we need you to do that. And we had a huge discussion after that. We said, are we supposed to get people completely industry ready? Is that part of the mission of a law school? Or as some of the points that David raised, Kelly raised, Raj raised, and Sandeep touched upon as well, which is that all these players need to come together. So law school cannot make them completely practice ready, because our fundamental aim, our fundamental goal is to produce, I think, for want of a better human beings, better people in society. People, you know, the Japanese have a fabulous term for this. They call it ikigai, sense of purpose. You know, if I don't give you a sense of purpose at the end of your education, then nothing, no skills that I equip you with will ever come to naught. I mean, there's no point. It has to be a deep, university has to be a deep philosophical inquiry as well as to who am I, what is my place in the world.
I'm not denying that. I'm saying that I'm striking that balance.
Correct.
That's my limited point.
And you're absolutely right. Now, how do we do that? And I take his point, which is a very good one, which is that in a resource-constrained country like India, how do we make this work? Where our resources are limited, money is limited, faculty is limited. Yeah. And I think one of the ways, so we cannot have full-fledged clinics in the way that the US has, which is law schools have very specialized clinics for almost each subject, which will get students who are interested in that line almost practice ready, because they're going through a clinic which is interfacing with the practice of law to a significant degree. We can't replicate that exact model, but what we can do is bring in more practitioners into the classroom, bring in more judges. You asked a great question about what constitutes a good judgment, to which Kelly responded, and I would say, you know, some of the old cases, let's keep our benchmark low. Even if I keep the benchmark low, can law schools here at least deliver basic legal education, which is, you know, there's a constant fad about the latest thing. I had a professor in law school, corporate law. He never taught us SEBI. This was, you know, the 1990s, India's liberalizing, SEBI's there, foreign investment coming in. He went back to the early 1900 case law. And Sandeep will bear me out on this. I asked my classmates today, I said, you know, we cribbed then. We said, why is he not teaching us the latest stuff? He went on Lee versus Lee, Salomon versus Salomon, the jurisprudential basis behind company law. And if I ask my classmates who are now leading partners at law firms, they say those building blocks were so important because we became super creative. Once you have the building block straight, I can build on top of that. It's like what Elon Musk says, you know, I build the tree trunk and the leaves I can easily attach at the end. And I think that's our real goal, to build the basics so strong that the rest they can pluck and they can do it on their own. Why do we need to teach them everything? That's not the purpose of law.
There's a lot of things nowadays, so I'll take that with a pinch of salt. Yes, the gentleman, yes, wanted to. Yes, please.
One, with respect to what my friend said over here, penetrating the market. Well, Professor Raj and I were almost classmates in Delhi University. It's about 20 years now. Since then...
So your candor will be well taken.
Yeah. Since then until now, the scenario hasn't changed much, in the sense that it's difficult to penetrate the market even now. You have law firms, you have the creme de la creme going there, the rest of it. Your father or grandfather must have been a lawyer, okay, must have known someone who's a great lawyer to be able to get into it. Then you sit at the desk for a couple of years, I don't know when. Now imagine a boy who comes from a nondescript town in eastern India, comes to Delhi, studies law. Who's going to listen to him? He's going to set up shop in the Delhi High Court. Who's going to bring him a case? So that fight is still on. The solution is nothing but the expansion of the market. The market hasn't expanded yet. There are many things that need to open up. We haven't yet come to that stage. The last point I want to make is about opportunity costs regarding engineering, MBA, and law. The opportunity costs of pursuing law are very high. You know, a bright student gets into a good MBA college or premier institute or engineering has a better chance of making it to the middle grade, if not to the top grade. In law, there's a lot of uncertainty. So unless that opportunity cost narrows down, right, that they will still be far away when law is taken as the first profession by students.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. I will come to David on how to bridge this opportunity cost after taking the question from the gentleman there. Yes. Can I have the mic?
So largely, when it comes to deciding on whether law schools should provide the students with the structure that they need to understand and when they go out in the legal world to be able to cope up with the changing environment and globalization, etc. So largely there exist two schools of thoughts in this field. One being that the aim of law schools is to actually provide them with a base, as Shanbad said, with the base that they need to actually go out on their own and provide them with a strong enough base that they're able to go out into the legal world on their own and learn the skills that they need to cope up with the changing environments. And the second school, following more of an ideology which believes that it's the job of the law schools to teach them the core skills that they need to be able to cope up with the changing environment, and to teach them and to inculcate values in them which they can use to actually cope up with them with the changing environment. That was just an observation. And my second follow-up question being that in the era of globalization, an important question that comes up is how to react to the paradigmatic changes in the sphere of information technology and assimilate and recognize the bearing that they have on legal education and the practice of law itself. So in the context of, say, artificial intelligence or robots that you might artificial intelligence or robots that we see around the world that could be taking over certain jobs of lawyers, that such as proofreading certain and briefing cases, etc. So how would you think that those changes in the world right now have a bearing on legal education, and how should legal education be changed or modified or added to in order to provide the students a better base to cope with these changes?
David, you want to take this? How do we beat AI?
So, I don't think it's a question of beating AI. Look, there may be a time in the long run in which we'll all be robots or be talking, but in the long run, we're all dead. So I'm actually much more interested in what's going to happen in the short and
optimistic note, I think we introduced the show, is it?
Let's talk about the foreseeable future. Law is and will continue for the foreseeable future to be a human capital business, which means that at its core, it's about people. Now, it's going to be about people working with machines, working with artificial intelligence, working with machine learning. After all, every single person here has one of these things, which they work with all the time. Why should we not be doing that in the practice of law? But I want to come back to the core question I think that you've raised and many of you raised. I tell my students and practitioners, but mostly my students all the time, that I think in some ways it's one of the scariest times to enter the profession, but I have no doubt it's the most exciting and the best time to enter the profession. Why? Because what law used to be, and particularly here in India, and this is partly what we studied in our book, it was a lot of rote memorization. It was a lot of transcribing. It was a lot of basic fundamental drafting. And then there was a small amount of creativity and ingenuity on top. The part of law that is going to be substantially transformed by technology is exactly the parts that were the least interesting and least rewarding to do, which are those basic fundamental ideas of being able to regurgitate the passages of a particular section of code and to do the kind of basic level research. The parts that are expanding, the parts that are exploding, are exactly those parts that are about the complex questions, as Shamnath said, of how do we live in this increasingly technologically dependent, globalized, multidisciplinary, diverse world that is filled with legal questions. Every time, take Adahar, every time we think about some idea of technology, it's ending up in a 800-page judgment by Justice Chandrachud that we all have to understand it, end up in European privacy law around what Facebook can do with your data. It ends up in thinking, how do we make law really accessible for the very first time to ordinary individuals who have more and more interface with law in more and more ways. This is the opportunity for all of these bright young students, is to use the building blocks you learn. And you're not going to learn everything you need to know in law school. Here's a hint: you don't learn everything you need to know in any kind of school. I don't care whether it's medical school, engineering school, whatever. You learn some principles, some building blocks, but hopefully you learn a passion for knowledge and a passion for problem solving. Lawyers at their best are problem solvers. And those problems have something to do with law, but they have as much to do with psychology, as you said, with technology, with politics, with humanity, with literature, with feelings. Don't forget that you are a person who becomes a lawyer. You don't just are a lawyer, you're also a person. So I think today, the things that are out there, the problems to be solved, of which law plays an important, though not exclusive role, are going to be more and more and more. And if you keep that love of learning and that drive to continue to put what you've learned together with all the other things that are out there, the amazing careers that you will find that we don't even know exist today.
Sure, okay. On that point, let me move to the third C that we want to talk about, and which is careers. I will come to you, and I will get Sandeep here to weigh in on when you interact with freshers, Sandeep. What is that? What are those couple of skills that you go like, oh, I wish law schools taught it, or to prepare or better prepare these freshers for a career, as opposed to, let's say, some of the softer skills. But I will keep going back to the practical knowledge, the practical skills that on day one, when you're an A0 or let's say interning or you're working with the senior counsel, you're expected to know.
Sure. So I would say that strangely enough, most of the important skills that I would look for go back to what Raj and Shamnal have talked about, which is the ability to do research, to analyze, to be thoughtful, to have the judgment that Kelly has talked about, which I understand takes several years to develop. When I look to hire somebody, I'm not necessarily looking for the right experience in that area. So let's say I'm looking for a fifth-year associate in the policy and regulatory practice. To me, it's not so important that in the last 4 years they have done policy and regulatory. To me, it's what's more important is that for whatever work they've done, they have demonstrated the ability to think, analyze, research, and write. Okay. So in terms of practical skills, I would say that translates into the ability to do research, to spot issues, to write. And I think of all these three, I think writing is where I see the biggest gap. There's things like, so when a first year associate is told that, okay, I would like to see a first draft of a memo next Friday, right? They literally take it as the first draft. What they should be thinking is that it should be the best draft of their life, right? That should come to me as their first draft, right? And that makes all the difference. You have to keep on working on it until it looks like a piece of art and not just cobbling together and copying, pasting, and researching and just putting it in there.
Okay, Kelly, you want to, so I'll come to you, Raj. Do you want to sort of weigh in on our colleges, let's say that, you interact with here in India, equipping the students enough to prepare themselves for the skill set, what Sandeep is talking about?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think is really important to know is that the law school admission test, it focuses upon reading comprehension, the thinking skill, and deductive and analytical reasoning. And research has shown that even by studying for it and then by taking it, it actually helps you develop exactly those skills that you're looking for, both in law school and then in the profession, because it helps you think like a lawyer, as the saying goes. and to be able to, another way people say it is to look around corners, to anticipate, to know what's coming next. So that, fundamental set of skills is so critical, and so the reason why I always try and remind us that when we talk about legal education, we need to make sure we're looking at the alignment between what we're doing in admission, and we're looking for those skills, those fundamental skills we want at the outset. We need to look at what we're doing then in law school. We've had a good conversation about what law school should be. We also need to think about the licensure and what that's testing and how that gateway is open or closed. And then on into the profession and what the, and you've made this point so well, David, it isn't just a profession, it's multiple professions. And so there's a large set of skills that are needed there. But I do want to say that one of the things that I think all students should remember is that writing skills, there are skills of writing, of course, but in so many ways, sometimes failures to write well are failures to think well. And so just remember that those skills of critical thinking, that's what helps you be a good writer too, once you have the very fundamental building blocks of writing. And so continuing to develop those critical skills are what will help you serve your clients and serve your world.
Okay, you have a question.
Like Mr. Bashir said, that law school is supposed to give, any university is supposed to give a sense of purpose and it's supposed to help you find what way you want to take. You taught at NUJS and you studied at NLS, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of people who went to study law and probably went in with a lot of resolve, who decided to change their course later, and they've gone into a variety of different fields. And that is important. You need to give the people the freedom to think. However, as you said, the people in the industry are saying it takes a whole year for them to catch up, which I'm sure for them as well is immensely frustrating, because in that time you have to keep somebody and you have to pay them, and they aren't giving you the value that they might feel that they deserve out of the employees as well, because lawyers aren't cheap, right? So how do you make those worlds meet? How do you make sure that they achieve a certain level of excellence in the industry while yet being able to have a certain level of creativity and freedom to go through other interests?
Shamla, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a great question. We really thought through this. And again, it goes back to the old dynamic between limited resources. Our end goal is to try and bridge the gap, get students more adept, more skilled, more qualified, so that they're better when they go into the employment avenues. One of the things that we thought of was, in the absence of a full-fledged clinic, can we bring in the practitioners to take courses, but in a rigorous way, not a one-off lecture. When I was in law school, we had these old judges and these senior lawyers come and, just extremely boring lectures. Nobody paid attention, right? Not all of them, some of them. But then when we started engaging with practitioners, there are a lot of practitioners who are, scholarly in their orientation, who are actually deep, very, very deep thinkers, can come in and want to engage with academia because it sort of gives them, it ignites a certain passion in them when they come into the law schools, and law schools really need to tap into that. But get them to come in and teach even a short course. But within the framework of the law school, you will get that practical infusion. The other is that there's a very strict disconnect between the law school, the legal profession, and the judiciary. You look at the latest list of amicus curiae that the Supreme Court invites, it's only from lawyers, not from academics. Whereas some of the best amicus curiae could be from within academia, people can really give a good policy dimension and academic insight into an issue before the courts, especially given that some of our judges now, we have some of the greatest judges now in the Supreme Court writing really deep analytical judgments that filled with jurisprudence, and this is the right time for academia to engage there. So students get a good sense of judgment, judging, and we also are able to get in more practitioners, and also vice versa. Why can't academics take a break, work with the judiciary, work with a law firm? And I think that's very, very slowly happening here. And our greatest advantage, and I was telling David this some time ago, when compared with other jurisdictions which we see as more mature, is that we are less entrenched.
Yeah.
We have our level, our field is very fertile for experimentation. And I think that's what Raj did, went in and experimented, created a beautiful example of a private university within the legal space that can do well. And I think we need to use that very effectively to create newer models here, to experiment, and to really chart out newer dimensions so that people can learn from India tomorrow.
Okay, I just going to make a quick plug. I hope some of these aspects of the judiciary considering academia and bring them into the courts will be addressed by Justice Rohinton Nariman, who's speaking at the Harvard event this evening, which the chat and the speech that you can exclusively catch on BloombergQuint.com. Raj, I'm going to come to you. We were chatting a little while ago that, and this ties all the 3 C's that we have talked about today. The students that come to your university have the option of both a 3-year course and a 5-year course. And this gentleman also sort of touched upon that point briefly, that not all those who are doing these 5-year course when they're 17 taking or are able to take a definitive call that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Is it time for our universities then, the National Law School universities, to also offer a 3-year course where you can take a better educated, informed call that law is my calling in life and not have to make that decision when you're way early, just after class 12 in school?
So the history of legal education in India has, if I were to identify 2 trends, they are both, one is democratization of legal education and diversification of legal education. Democratization, I mean that if you look at the kind of people who are entering into law, legal education, it's no longer the grandsons and daughters and sons and daughters of people who have been in the legal profession. We have a huge number of first generation law students whose parents and their entire set of relatives have not had a single lawyer, and they're coming into legal education and legal profession. The second is diversification, in the sense that as these students study law and graduate from law school, they are no longer wedded to what is known as the legal profession in terms of legal careers. In fact, legal profession itself has been diversified. If you look at, say, 3 decades ago, a typical law graduate was limited to the practice of law in courts. Today, law graduates are joining firms, corporate law firms. Sandeep is an example of that, but they're working as in-house counsel in corporations and companies. They're working in LPO. They're working in think tanks, research institutions, non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations. They're also branching out of law and working in corporations and other entrepreneurial initiatives. I believe very strongly that law is the new liberal arts, in the sense that people who come into law schools are expected to have a range of knowledge and skills and perspectives which will enable them to do many more things, including law. In fact, the beauty of LSAT as an examination for empowering people to enter into law school is that it doesn't even test law as a subject. It does not test general knowledge as a subject. It does not test mathematics as a subject, because it focuses its attention on analytical reasoning, reading comprehension, and logical reasoning, all of which will empower people to not only become better lawyers if they choose to, but pretty much pursue any career in different walks of life. In fact, this is the message that we need to tell our students who enter into law school. I, for one, very strongly believe that as we think about our own expansion, my vision is that 20% of our graduating class from law should consider legal academia. We have lamented for years together that we don't have enough faculty members in our law schools, we don't have capacity. Imagine a situation where the best and the brightest of law graduates from schools, a certain percentage of them enter into law schools. Many problems of mediocrity that we talk about in the legal profession, in academia, in judiciary, can be addressed by the single biggest reform if we can get the best minds into our law schools as professors. That's what the world's top law schools do. One of the reasons why I was inspired at Harvard is because the people who taught me were outstanding individuals who could inspire and engage and empower and create an imagination surrounding the law. It's not the provisions of law, it's the ability to inspire and find a meaning towards the pursuit of legal education.
Okay, yes, short answer to your question, absolutely yes. I think we need to start getting back our focus on the 3-year law program. Historically, India has had a 3-year law program, and at some point in our history, when law was the least lucrative option in terms of education, engineering and medicine were right on top, law was the last option for almost anyone that wanted to do a professional degree. It was important then to sort of resuscitate law, to bring it back on the table, to give it a certain reputation
And for that, the model that Professor Menon and the others who were the founding fathers of the National Law School model, what they thought then was that we should really make it into a 5-year program so that students coming straight out of school would have something to aspire towards in terms of professional degree, and you could also better mold their minds rather than having students who are coming from first degrees who are a little more political in their orientation as part of university networks and setups where students are much more political. We have a ready bunch of students that can be disciplined much more easily, that will sit in classes full time. And I think that particular narrative has served its purpose now. And now, unfortunately, again, it goes back to an old question of resources versus what we need to do ideally. We cannot achieve interdisciplinarity overnight in India. I think Raj and the others raised a pertinent question, which is that standalone law universities is still the norm in India. Within the standalone law universities, how do you get students to think outside of the law? I think one of the best ways is to really get students from other disciplines to come in to the law school, because students in the 5-year program have to study sociology, history, and some of the other subjects, but nobody pays attention to these. You're
Right.
all very impatient and anxious to be a lawyer, so you want to do away with social science and get into the hardcore legal subjects, and that's going to take some time to change. So I think in the interim, one of our best models is really to go back through the 3-year model and to invite a diversity of people, especially now that law is popular and may attract the bankers, may attract the scientists, may attract others. And I'm a specialist in intellectual property, and I see it day in and day out that we are the much poorer for it because we're getting straight-jacketed people straight out of 5-year programs into IP, and not the scientists, not the economists, not the historians who can lend a much richer perspective to the study of these subjects and make legal education and make even serve better as legal professionals when they go outside and have a better multidisciplinary, diverse perspective.
And perhaps engineers too, since this gentleman mentioned
Absolutely.
that, being a lawyer is serving out to be, more lucrative in his village compared to engineers. We have a question there.
Good morning to all of you.
Please, you can take the mic, yes.
Good morning to all of you. My question is specifically for Raj, sir. I appreciate his vision for attracting at least brightest student, 20% of the brightest student in the academia, but the situation is so dismal. I came from Delhi University, ours is 3-year program. So recently, I think 6 or 7 months ago, Honorable Justice Geeta Mittal was delivering a lecture in my campus. So while delivering a lecture, at one point of time, she asked, out of 200, how many of you want to join academia? So hardly, I think, 2 students were able to raise their hand. And again, while interning under various illustrious senior counsels and senior judges of the Supreme Court, I came across a number of 5-year, those who are pursuing 5-year program, whether they are from Jindal, whether they are from NLS, NUJS, or Christ, or Symbiosis Pune, or anywhere else. So I also found the situation is very similar to what is going through with Delhi University. Even in that scenario also, I was very hardly able to find 1 or 2 students. They say ki I might develop my, I might pursue my career in academia, but I'm not sure. So that was the kind of, so I think there are a number of drastic steps that needs to be undertaken. So I think Professor Raj sir will do something, and this is something very much the need of the hour.
Feedback, then a question, yes.
One aspect of this is not just the problem with regard to legal education, but unfortunately higher education as well. Across the board in India, the best of graduates across disciplines are no longer aspiring to come into academia. And legal education, it has taken a more virulent form because of the fact that the incentive structures, the imagination surrounding institutions, the aspiration surrounding the academia is even less, and hence the best of Indian law graduates are not at all considering legal academia. And that's the core of reform in legal education, is to improve the quality and promote excellence in law schools.
Sure. Sandeep, you had a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree that I think we have a hard time attracting people to academia, but one heartening trend that I've seen based on personal experience is a lot of students opting for careers outside law firms. So for example, I'm in the corporate practice of the firm, but I also oversee a practice that we call public policy and regulatory affairs. I find a lot of young students who write to us, they specifically say that this is the kind of work I want to do. and then they join us, and then after 2, 3, 4 years, whatever, they also then they go on to do some research project. And so, for example, two of our brightest people this year, one has gone to Oxford to do a project on the rights of unborn. Another is doing a fellowship with one of the foundations. I also have come across, we have hired people who worked in, I don't know if you know about this, is an excellent program run by an organization called PRS. They place associates with members of parliament. And they call them LAMs, legislative assistants to members of parliament. There are people who work with Niti Aayog, people who have left law firms. So this, I think this trend, all this, it doesn't take them to academia. I think it's a big, big step forward.
Okay, it's a stepping stone.
Yeah.
I guess we had a question here as well. Yes, ma'am.
Question is a very basic one. So I just wanted to tell you, I'm a BA LLB student. I'm in my first year, in fact, the first semester. So we don't really have the depth of knowledge about law. We don't actually even know the definition of law. We're just here from high school. So what do you expect from us? What should actually we expect from the upcoming years? Should we start about thinking law as a profession from the very beginning, or we should just consider whatever they are teaching in college? We should focus on that, or we should just consider it it as a profession and start thinking about it and go to the depths of it.
Okay, which of the panelists wants to take this question?
David, you should tell
Yes,
them.
please, Sandeep.
I have a view on this. I don't think this is something that you have to decide today. I think it can vary with different people. Let it come to you naturally. There may be some of you who may know on day one that I want to be a practicing lawyer, I want to be a litigator, I want to be this or that. There may be some of you who may not know till the 5th year exactly what they want to do, and I think that's totally fine. Each individual is different, and you have all these choices, so why do you have to force yourself to make a call on day one?
So you have time on your side. David, I am going to come to you.
Let me
Yes.
say this, because I think what you're asking is a very important question, and many of you have. Here's one thing. So I run a big project studying legal careers. Started in the United States, but we've been doing it here in India and Brazil and China and all the places we've been. And here's one thing that is for certain about your careers that's going to be very different than everyone who's sitting up here. You're going to have multiple jobs and multiple aspects of your careers. So I run a big project, or help to run a big project called we call it the After the JD project. It's a 10-year longitudinal study of lawyer careers. In that 10 to 12 years, most of the people had 3 or 4 different jobs. So I think there's a lot of emphasis on preparing for your first job, but your first job is only that. It's only the first thing you're going to do. And what you really need to do is to prepare yourself to be someone who's a lifelong learner across many different platforms. So take this time where you're here to learn not just about fields, but about yourself. Go back to what Shamnad said. You want to come out of this with a sense of yourself about what's important to you, about what are the things that interest you, and then begin to find ways to express that interest throughout different jobs. And when those jobs cease being interesting and rewarding, move to something else.
Okay, all right. I do have to wrap this session. David, I am going to give the last word to you on if you have to give one advice to law schools in India and one advice to law students. What would those two things be? Considering that you've looked at several jurisdictions? One advice to law schools and one to the law students.
So they're parallel in a way. My advice to law schools in India. Law schools in India, particularly the leading ones that we've talked a lot about here, I think do a very good job of teaching students basic legal principles and to how to think about certain areas of the law. What they don't do as well is to teach them about what careers in law look like and can look like, and to empower students not just to learn a particular area or a particular subject, but to learn how to not just think like a lawyer, but to think about the role of law in society more broadly and how they want to be a part of it. And that's the message for law students, which is to think of this as an opportunity to learn about yourself and to learn about the world and to be excited about the possibilities that are out there. I was saying in the break that there's so many areas of law that didn't exist when I was your age. I mean, think of human rights law or environmental law or the law of cybersecurity or the law of privacy or gender studies or all sorts of kinds of ways that you can be using your legal skills that didn't exist before that don't often mean just practicing law. So the fact that many people go to law school and then end up doing other things is, I think, a very good thing, because it shows the way in which law is more and more important in every part of our society, and every part of our society is more and more important in understanding law. And if you think about it that way, then I think you can see that the possibilities for you out there are terrific, and we need you.
All right, and there's no bigger testament to it than what's happening in the Indian Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court is seized of commercial matters, of religious matters, of matters of auction and licensing and everything that you can think under the sun. Well, debates like this may seem academic, but they're important to make Indian legal education globally competitive. Thank you all for bringing in your questions, and I hope that all the insights that our panelists here brought into the conversation will benefit you in your careers, and you as you take away some of those messages with you after watching this show. Thank you for joining us here on The Fine Print, and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.